Yeah, so I'm really excited to introduce our expert panel members today. Both of them are leaders in the intersection of ocean conservation and investment. Adam is an independent investor based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He built and led what became one of the largest wind and solar developments in Central Europe, exiting for over 2 billion euros. And now let's focus on ocean tech investing. He's been backing companies like Ocean Rainforest, a kelp farming operation with sites across the Faroe Islands, Iceland, Santa Barbara, and Mexico. He also mentors startups in the space through MIT and Harvard. Mark is the president of the Ocean Foundation, a role he's held for over 20 years at this point, working across 40 countries, 6 continents, in areas like blue carbon restoration, plastic pollution. He does advise 3 public equity portfolios and around 14 private equity firms, and brings a background as an attorney and an international relations scholar to his work in the blue economy, investment, and framework space. So with that, now that we've got the intros over, and I'd like to move into our conversation, I'm going to exit out so everybody can see us well. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, great. So I think, yeah, now that we've met the experts, I'd like to really start off the conversation today with grounding it in understanding a term we'll be using throughout the webinar, the blue economy. I think it means different things to different people, really depending on where they sit within an organization or where they are in the blue economy. So I'd really like to open it up to our experts today to get their perspective on how they would define it. So maybe Adam, what I'll do is start with you. Really, when you think about the blue economy, how would you define it in your terms?
Thank you, Garrett, and it's a pleasure to be here today in the afternoon. I'm an independent investor, and I look at this from a terrestrial perspective of the economy moved into the ocean. You may or may not know that there are 15,000 vessels out there with some form of clean technology on them, some emissions controls, some fuel efficiency, very akin to the onshore fuel efficiency and emissions controls technologies, but taken into the ocean. That comprises about 48% of the dry tonnage. And that means to me as an investor, there's still another 52% out there that's open to invest in and develop companies for. Some of the emerging technologies for this sort of shipping are wind-assisted vessels. There are only about 110 of them, but that's 110 vessels, and there's a lot more of them coming off the production line. So that's an example of it. If I were to shift the focus to aquaculture, that's a $500 billion industry out of the roughly 3 trillion, and that 3 trillion number doesn't include all of the value that goes through the undersea cables for the Googles and other networks of the world, and it doesn't include all the port facilities. So the 3 trillion is just the pure ocean stuff, of which, as I said, 500 billion is aquaculture. When I started investing in the blue economy, people were consuming about 14 kilos per capita of aquaculture products for the billions of people around the world. Now that's up to 21 kilograms, and there are many more people. So that's an expanding industry as well. And as I'll talk about in the case studies, that includes finfish, it includes shellfish and kelp and other algae. And sometimes that production is coming onshore through RAS, and sometimes it's going into the deep ocean. So there's just a few examples, Garrett, of what I consider the blue economy. Mark's probably got many more.
Well, thank you, Adam. I really appreciate that. And yeah, Mark, I'd love to kind of get your take on it as well. How do you define the blue economy?
Yep. With one of my hats as a senior fellow at the Center for Blue Economy, we've spent a lot of time discussing what this means and how many definitions there are. The sad place is that the term blue economy gets used to mean just about anything that's connected to the ocean. In some cases, anything that's even connected to water. And that is a problem. If it means everything, it basically means nothing. And it certainly doesn't tell, like a procurement director, whether there's a decision to be made. The distinction that I find most useful in practice when we're doing investing and everything else is that, the ocean economy is huge. It is this full 2.5 or 3 trillion of global goods and services that touch the sea in some fashion. Shipping, offshore energy, conventional fisheries, aquaculture, coastal tourism, ports. But most of that is business as usual. The blue economy, as we mean it today, and as we try and get across, is the subset of that that is sustainable, that is ideally regenerative. It's the part that's structured around protecting the systems that generate the value in the first place. Because without healthy ocean, none of the supply chains we're going to discuss today are even going to work. The implication for our audience today is that companies are almost certainly already participating in the ocean economy through marine derived ingredients, packaging materials, seafood inputs, things that are shipped to them, regulatory exposure, you name it. The question is not whether you have an ocean exposure. The question is whether you know where it is and whether you're managing it in a deliberate fashion. I think the companies that are winning in this space are the ones that have really reframed ocean engagement from purely ESG into a supply chain and financial materiality question. And that's sort of a frame we'll use a little bit today.
Great. Well, Mark and Adam, thank you so much for the definition of the blue economy, kind of how you see it. Daniel, I'm going to pass it to you to begin our dive into some of the case studies with Adam and Mark. And you're on mute, Daniel.
I am muted. Sorry, apologies. I think that definition is a perfect segue into a couple of the case studies we wanted to talk through today to provide context for how successful partnerships have been made in this space. Toward that end, I thought we could start, Adam, with the ocean rainforest biofertilizer case study. If you could provide an overview there on how the partnership was established and the outcomes for our audience. We can start there.
Certainly. As Garrett mentioned, Ocean Rainforest was founded in the Faroe Islands, and it has now expanded to many other continents. Ocean Rainforest farms kelp. It grows this kelp and then cuts it up and makes a slurry out of it, so it is a biostimulant. This biostimulant is used often in berries. For example, if you had berries on your cereal this morning, they might well have had a ocean rainforest stimulation, which would have helped their survivability, helped their health, and helped their growing. So that when a large berry producer wants to do a partnership with Ocean Rainforest, for example, they're getting a benefit of an organic product versus an inorganic product. They're getting a interesting supply chain because this kelp is grown, as Garrett mentioned, in the Faroe Islands, in Mexico, in California, and soon to be Maine and Iceland. So unlike a chemical fertilizer, which often would go through the Straits of Hormuz to get out into the world, you are growing it in a variety of places. So you have a slightly more secure supply chain. And this partnership has been a big benefit for ocean rainforest because the berry producers were able to specify exactly what tonnage they needed of the biostimulant. And that allows ocean rainforest to produce at optimal capacity. It doesn't have a shortfall, or it doesn't have a over demand. If it was doing this in a normal commercial market, and wondering whether each of the purchasers was going to purchase or not going to purchase, then it might well have an uneconomic production. If it's only operating at 80% capacity utilization, then it has to raise prices, and that makes it less economic. But with the partnership offtakes, it allowed ocean rainforest to go from being a smallish company in the Faroe Islands to being an established company. And now it has presences on multiple continents. So that's the sort of partnership that I see as very valuable. And one of the topics that's coming up that Daniel showed was partnership versus procurement. I actually don't think it's a versus. I think it's part of the partnership process, that you, under a joint development agreement of some sort, which is a negotiated agreement. You can find some online, but in the end, it will end up as a negotiated partnership. You will be talking about supply, you'll be talking about technology, who's providing the money, who's providing the sweat, who's providing each of the various things that are necessary to go from a startup to an established company. That's my ocean rainforest case study. I'm happy to answer questions if you put them in the chat.
Sure. And a question I have is, for the end user, what is the benefit or story that they're able to market? Is it a carbon offset? Has it assisted an entity with meeting an ESG goal? Yeah, curious how that's framed for the receiving end of the supply.
So the berry growers have not marketed the ocean rainforest name or capabilities to the consumers like you and I, Daniel, and the other people on the call. They have just used this to be able to call their product organic, one, and two, to actually have much better P&L because they have a healthier crop, they have a more robust crop, so that they're able to charge more per pound of goods.
Great, thank you, Adam. Moving forward, I did want to cover, Mark, your case study on the chitosan sourcing.
Yeah, happy to do that. A company called Tidal Vision is a great example of what happens when someone looks at a waste problem and sees a supply chain of opportunity instead. Chitosan is a biopolymer that's derived from chitin, which is the literal structural material in crustacean shells. It has a whole bunch of useful properties. It's a great antimicrobial, it's biodegradable, it forms a nice film. It's being used in wound care, food preservation coatings, agricultural applications, number of personal care applications. And it's not a niche material. It's really expanding in its use. The problem historically was feedstock access and processing costs. But the thing that changed the picture was seafood processors, including operations like Ready Seafoods here in Maine. They were paying to dispose of lobster and crab shells, tons of them. It was a waste management cost. It was a headache for the municipality. It was a real missed opportunity just sitting on the dock. Tidal Vision built a chitosan extraction process around that existing waste stream. They didn't create a new resource extraction operation. They figured out how to monetize what the seafood industry was already producing and discarding. That is circular supply chain logic. The feedstock has no competing buyer. The processing co-locates with the existing seafood infrastructure, and the end product addresses real commercial demand. This company had a recent $140 million Series B, and that reflects that the market agrees that the model is credible at scale. So from this, I think we can see that some of the best blue economy entry points are often adjacent to existing operations, not solely greenfield resource extraction. Waste stream feedstocks change the economics fundamentally because you're not necessarily competing for virgin biomass. And to go to a point that Adam was just referring to, co-investment or offtake agreements at the mid-scale phase, say that 10 tons, and then transitioning eventually to say 100 tons, is where corporate partners add disproportionate value and can help secure access both to capital but also outcomes.
I have a quick question here, Mark, on this one. As the company was growing, were there particular like partnership models that proved effective for their scaling? Was it commitments to purchasing agreements? What allowed them to like successfully kind of scale the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was sort of referring to with the example of Ready Seafoods here in Maine, was that that's really how they did it and succeeded, was basically saying, put that all in a bin and we'll come pick it up, and leaving it at that. And it meant that Ready Seafoods could actually modestly sell what was a waste product instead of paying for it to be managed by the city waste utility.
And when it comes to, so we've chitosan has been an ingredient that's come up across claims. What differentiates the chitosan providers? Is it the technology they're using to purify the end product, or is it folks who just have more access to the supply? Just curious, in your experience, how do you differentiate between the best chitosan supplier?
So obviously, if you're buying from the supplier, films or antimicrobial products, you want to know that your supply chain is going to be solid and continuous. Therefore, you need them to have source, and that's where making the deal with a seafood processor makes all of the difference. I don't think the technology, if you want to call it, to extract the properties of the crustacean shells is that controversial or difficult. But yeah, you want it pure, but you most importantly want your supply chain to be guaranteed.
Great, thanks for the insights, Mark. All right. Yeah, Garrett, I'll pass to you.
Yeah. Mark, I know in the build up to the webinar, another case study we were talking about was the marine ingredient replacement for petroleum. I'd love to maybe have you walk us through that, talk through the problem that was being solved, and curious just also to hear any like lessons you pulled out of it that are applicable to being successful in the blue economy.
So in this case, I'm going to talk about the pattern writ large rather than a single company, because I think it's a little bit more instructive. A significant portion of the ingredients in conventional cosmetics, personal care products are petroleum based. Emollients, surfactants, preservatives, films, they're largely petrochemical in origin. The industry has known this for years, and there's been steady pressure from consumers, from regulators, from ESG commitments to find alternatives. And what we see is really interesting is that the ocean already solved many of these formulation problems, often millions of years before the petroleum era. Squalane is a highly stable emollient now widely used in premium skincare. And historically, it was harvested from shark liver oil, not exactly a sustainable source, but it was a product that didn't require petrochemicals. That source, because it's not sustainable, has been largely abandoned on sustainability grounds, but algae-derived squalane has stepped in, offering comparable or superior performance without the ecological damage. Algae-based acetylcysteine is another case where the ocean provides a biosynthetic pathway that outperforms petroleum chemistry on environmental footprint, and in some applications on performance. Marine collagen derived from fish processing byproducts is replacing bovine and porcine sources in high-end cosmetic applications. And this biomimicry frame matters. The ocean doesn't just provide the raw materials, it provides blueprints, molecular architecture that can be optimized over evolutionary time for performance in aqueous, saline, high pressure, and even UV exposed environments. And these properties translate well into personal care products. So the path is not to extract from ocean at scale. The path is to understand what the ocean figured out and find a biosynthetic or lower impact way to replicate it. Marine derived alternatives to petrochemicals are not all at the same readiness level. Some, such as algal squalane, fish collagen from bi-streams, are commercially available and cost competitive today. Others are very much at early stage. And the first corporate action is therefore a readiness filter, not a procurement decision. For companies in the beauty and personal care industry, the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction and the CSRD exposure in this ingredient category is real and growing. Origin documentation for your marine-derived actives are now a compliance matter, not just a sourcing preference. So there's a lot to be thinking about in this category.
Interesting. And yeah, I like that the marine source that was being used, was not sustainable, and then we were able to pivot over to a more sustainable ocean-derived source for it. So it's great to hear that, with a bit of effort and research, you can kind of pivot away from things and find that sustainability niche. Well, great, Mark. I really appreciate you walking us through that one. Daniel, I'll pass back over to you to wrap up with our last case study quickly here.
Yeah, sure. This is an interesting case study. Adam, I found it fascinating, the conversation of the Invasive's business model. And again, another interesting way that folks are aligning with blue economy initiatives and innovating in interesting ways, in my opinion. In the interest of time, if you could provide a brief overview of this case study before we move forward, but I would love for you to share your insights on Inversa.
Sure, Daniel. Inversa takes invasive species, lionfish in the Caribbean, python in Florida, Asian carp in the Mississippi River, and has a baseline business model of servicing the states that are affected by these invasive species, Florida for python, for example, or the Caribbean islands, and servicing them to get rid of this invasive species. But it has an innovative partnership model with consumer brands, famous designer houses, to convert these species into sustainable leather. So it is taking animals that have beautiful skins and converting it to leather that is used in watch bands, belts, shoes, all sorts of different consumer products, and you as the producer of those can claim that you are helping get rid of this invasive species. So it has a lot of sustainability benefits for the end user. Is that brief enough, Daniel, or would you like me to dive in more?
No, I think that's great. I think that captures the unique business model aspect of, I thought this idea of capturing invasive species and not just capturing them, but doing something with them it was pretty interesting. I think that's a great way to earmark our case study section of the webinar. Moving forward, we're going to focus a bit on partnership strategies. And with that, I'll pass to Garrett to start us off.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mark and Adam, for running through the case studies. I think it was really informative, interesting to hear, different ways that things are being done in the blue economy. I kind of wanted to shift gears now and move into that partnership versus procurement. Maybe it's partnership and procurement, as you were mentioning earlier, and really kind of dig into this like heart of the scaling ocean investment. When should corporations maybe fund infrastructure, share risks, take equity stakes, rather than simply waiting for these markets to mature on their own. And Mark, one of the areas specifically wanted to discuss with you, based on our conversation to build up to this webinar, was around corporate risk sharing, and what this looks like in practice. Things like the finance stack behind these deals, community investments, impact bonds, and the like. So maybe Mark, if you could walk us through how you see corporations sharing risks in the blue economy today, and where you're seeing the most promising models emerge. And you're on mute, Mark.
The framing that I find most useful here is to think of the blue economy investment not as a single instrument, but as a stack with different layers of capital taking on different slices of risk, each appropriate for that actor's risk profile. At the very base, of course, you have philanthropic and public capital, de-risking things. You have grant funding, development finance, concessional loans. These tend to absorb the risks that commercial capital just won't touch. Early stage science, regulatory uncertainty, ecosystem restoration with long payback times. In the middle, you've got, what all of you are probably familiar with as blended finance structures, guarantees, first loss tranches, impact bonds. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs is a good working example. It uses UN and philanthropic anchor capital to crowd in private investment by de-risking the downsides. Parametric insurance is another tool in this layer. Reef insurance policies in Mexico pay out automatically when storm damage exceeds a trigger threshold, enabling rapid restoration without delay, rapid damage assessment, and avoiding claims processing. That protects the coastal infrastructure that we care about, hotels and fisheries, that depends on the reef to prevent storm surge and wave damage. Then at the very top, you have corporate equity, joint development agreements, offtake agreements, and this is where the audience today probably tends to operate. The key insight is that corporations don't have to participate at the base of this stack. They don't need to fund the science. They need to show up at the right inflection point for them when a technology or a supplier has de-risked everything enough to be interesting, but needs a corporate partner to cross the CapEx threshold and get to commercial scale.
And so, within that stack, so it sounds like, maybe the partnership equity structures that you've seen, bring the most value to, the corporate kind of level. Has that been those equity stakes, joint developments? What have you seen kind of be successful at that stage and that level of the stack?
Yeah. So what actually works, as far as I've seen, are things like joint development agreements, and they're relatively underutilized and underappreciated by large companies. The structure in that is that you would co-fund development of a specific ingredient or a material or a process in exchange for a period of exclusivity in a defined market or product category. And you're not acquiring the company, you're not taking on VC type risk. You're funding something towards a specific commercial outcome that benefits your supply chain, and you're getting first mover access in return. The window matters. Exclusivity windows on ocean-derived specialty ingredients are closing, and the companies writing these agreements today are setting the sourcing terms for 5 and 10 years. Two more examples. I'm really enjoying looking at academic collaborations and tech transfer. These are more accessible than corporate innovation teams realize. Bigelow Labs here in Maine, Scripps Oceanography, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. These institutions are actively looking for commercial partners, in part because federal funding constraints are accelerating and the need for industry partnerships can take some of that place. A conversation with a technology transfer office at a major ocean research institution is a low-cost, high-option first step that you can take. The last example I'll give that I think is something that really works is the equity stakes that you mentioned. These make sense when you want more than supply access, when you want to influence the product's development, formulation, or process design. But that kind of equity is usually a later stage tool. The JDA could get you in the door. The equity locks in the relationship once you've validated the technology. The question I would leave with the audience is, what ocean-derived input in your cost structure would be most disruptive if you lost access to it over the next 2 years? That input is where you should start, not with a fund investment, but not with a sustainability commitment, but with a structured conversation with a supplier about what a JDA would look like to protect your cost structure and your supply chain.
And then also thinking the tech transfer piece is a really interesting angle, Mark, as well. If it's something, you can, transfer over from an academic partner, an institute that has developed the technology to a, pilot stage or later pilot stage technology that then is ready for commercialization. I know you mentioned Scripps. Are there any other kind of academic hubs, institutes that you've seen outside of Scripps that kind of come to mind when you think of tech transfer?
Yeah, so there are a number of blue tech hubs in the United States, one in San Diego, one in Boston, one on the Gulf Coast, one up here in Maine, the New England Ocean Cluster, and there are a handful of others. And they're really bringing together sort of academics and in local investors often to get that real startup sort of feel to things, but they're specializing in blue technology and sustainability and ocean connectivity, and it's really, really exciting. Europe is doing it as well. The United States is doing as much as it can to keep up, and we did a study on this that eventually led to a nonpartisan bicameral, bipartisan bill that got passed to put more money into blue tech clusters and blue tech hubs in the United States. So we think this is a nonpartisan moment to work together on these things.
Mark, thanks for walking us.
Jump in.
Jump in. Yeah, I know the JDE stuff is really of interest too.
To add on Mark's comment there, to note that the Bigelow Labs has the National Algae Collection, and they're growing specialized algae to produce chemical products like Mark was talking about earlier as substitutes for petroleum products. And to note that the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which has really deep, and I use that as a pun from the ocean, experience in vessels, in autonomous surface vessels, autonomous underwater vessels, that are one of the things that are opening up the ocean to scientific and corporate research. They are spinning out several companies with those sorts of technologies. So there's all sorts of different ways to cooperate with these academic institutions that Mark has talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Really, the tech transfer and these kind of institutes that are sitting on all this knowledge that can help accelerate blue economy successfully. And I know Adam will kind of touch on the JDE stuff here in a second. So I know you have some more to say on that topic. Mark, thanks for walking us through the finance stack. Daniel, I'll pass back over to you to kind of walk through with Adam on the next topic in this partnership versus procurement discussion.
Yeah, sure. And I just wanted to circle back the idea of autonomous vessels for ocean exploration and how that's going to open up the just understanding what's down there and the opportunities we have if we can explore with unmanned vessels. I think that's a really interesting point I hadn't thought of, through our discussions. Back on the point of we had talked about astaxanthin at Bigelow as well, unless we've already kind of covered that opportunity, but I don't know if you wanted to touch on that at all from the perspective of partnering with an organization for supply chain resilience, Adam.
It's something that it's something both Mark and I can talk about, which is that astaxanthin is a crucial ingredient in getting your salmon and other theoretically wild caught, now farmed fish to market. And astaxanthin can come from algae, as the Bigelow labs have developed, or it can come from petroleum products. And there's a big difference in the value of that fish when it comes as an organic product to the supermarket near you versus a petroleum product additive. Mark, would you like to add more on that?
I think the only thing I would add is, right now, the most important application is the color of your salmon. And we historically have relied on krill and other things that salmon eat to produce color and make salmon not be gray at the grocery store. But we can't harvest krill oil at scale and really keep up. And so the synthetic again is similar to what we're talking about in biomimicry of getting the right thing done without a petrochemical colorant that is making the meat the right color of pink. There used to be this very famous color fan that had, you could pick the different color you wanted your salmon to be if you were a farmer, and was all petroleum derived color additives for your fish. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather eat something that didn't have petrochemicals in it.
Certainly.
If I can
add, go ahead, Adam.
Daniel, if I can add on the krill aspect, this is a really interesting supply chain risk because you've got El Nino coming along, and that drives up the price of krill. Krill is currently at about $3,000 a metric ton. In the year 2000, it was less than $1,000 a metric ton. And basically in the first decade of this century, it was $1,000 or less per ton. In the second decade, it was about $1,000 to $2,000 per ton. Now, because of El Nino driving up the price of krill and anchovies and the risks to the supply chain, it's over $3,000, which is driving up the price of salmon, except you can now get substitutes from the algae or from petroleum.
Yeah, I appreciate the insights, Adam. And regarding the color question or the color additives, is that consumer driven is that regulatory driven, or what's driving, looking for alternative but non-petroleum based colorants?
I think the biggest driver is the one that Adam just mentioned, which is cost. But I do think consumer demand has really pushed things, and there is a bit of regulatory opportunity here because the regulatory bodies are curtailing certain kinds of krill fisheries in certain places because it's overfished. And I think there's been some real questions about what's being put into fish that are being sold. And even things like, disclosing what you put into the fish that you're selling from a farm can really close down the use of the petrochemical version.
Yeah, thanks for your insights there. All right, as we get to the end of the hour here, we thought we could spend some time ruminating on the future of the blue economy and, opportunities for folks as we're looking ahead 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years. With that, Mark, we'll start with you on where you see the industry headed, where the opportunities may be. We welcome your insights.
Sure. I'm going to start with a frame that runs a little bit against conventional wisdom in the investment community, and so I'm curious about what Adam thinks. I really feel one of the important things to talk about here, if we're talking about sustainability and regeneration, is replication and not trying to go to scale. The instinct in venture capital and much of the corporate innovation world is, can this scale? Can that scale? But scale is often the enemy of sustainability in the ocean context. The shellfish restoration project that works on a stretch of coastline in Maine or someplace because it's calibrated to that ecosystem, those tidal patterns, those species, that community of fishers, you can't scale it to industrial size. The model often breaks ecologically, socially, or both. What I find more exciting is replication, taking a model that works locally and understanding why it worked and helping it take root in other locations with appropriate adaptation. That's very different as an investment thesis than build $100 million centralized operation. It may produce a number of $30 to $50 million companies that are solid, sustainable business, but it's not going to produce NVIDIA returns, and that's fine because this is a corporate game, not a VC game. I can talk about a bunch of other things here, but I want to be conscious of our time, and so Adam, I'll toss over to you.
I agree with Mark entirely that this is a corporate game versus a VC game. The companies will eventually grow by replicating in various locations, like ocean rainforest replicates the kelp farming in Faroe Islands, Mexico, California, now Maine, then Iceland. It is not the same in each thing. It is not scaling massively, like Mark says. So it's not going to achieve VC type returns. It's going to achieve great corporate returns. I see the blue economy both moving inland with onshore productions of finfish and algae for specific ingredients, and further offshore. Further offshore is driven by the ability of autonomous underwater vehicles and autonomous surface vehicles to scale. And that's where you might see some VC investment, because having a human powered ship going hundreds of miles offshore with crew quarters is extraordinarily expensive and makes that part of the economy not viable. However, if you can do this all autonomously from land, then you can start moving fish farming out into the open ocean or other activities into the open ocean. And that's where you might get VC investment, is in the vehicles, the transport between shore and those offshore points.
Great. Thank y'all for the insights there. I know we're coming up on time. There is one question I wanted to field quickly that came in through the audience. with respect to Adam's biostimulants on Barry's example, does Adam or Mark think of any changes, for example, in geopolitics, climate, or regulations that may make it more beneficial to rely on algal biostimulants, or alternatively, make it challenging to use algal biostimulants? I don't know if there's any quick insights here. And of course, for the audience, we can follow up afterward.
Yes, I'm happy to answer questions by email that you send through Prescouter. On that question, quickly, the risk from algal biostimulants is the warming ocean. You may have to move locations, but by having multiple locations, let's call it Alaska, California, Maine, et cetera, you actually diversify your supply chain and make it less reliant on oil production. For example, it has to go through the Straits of Hormuz. Of course, 6 months ago, we would not have considered the Straits a big risk factor, but we suddenly learned that it was. On Mark's example before with Chitosan, relying on waste products is wonderful, but it also runs a risk that if the producer of those products goes out of business, your supply chain is put at risk. And therefore, you also need to have some ability to produce the product at the same time as using the waste product. Therefore, you are diversifying your supply chain. And Mark may want to comment on that.
I think that summed it up.
Great. Thank you, Adam and Mark. Thank you all for attending today. We will be following up with the deck for attendees. Our email addresses, Garrett, if you can go back one slide. If anyone has any questions or follow-up, please feel free to reach out to us or any of the SMEs on the panel today. We will also be hosting upcoming panels within different aspects of the blue economy throughout the rest of the year. And thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Thank you to the SME panel, Mark and Adam, for your insights today. And hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And let us know if you have any questions. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Mark, Adam, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Take care. Bye-bye.